fitness movement is brought to you by Zor Fitness. We offer coaching and individualized program design, as well as educational content for coaches and athletes. It's all at one place, zorfitness.com.
All right, guys, so obviously we met this morning. My name is Day. I'm coming from Tucson, Arizona, so I'm freezing right now. This is not pleasant. So if you see me shivering, hopefully I get warmed up in a second. Just a bit background information on me before I dive into the presentation here in my little talk. I want it to be conversational, so feel free to chime in throughout the conversation and all that. If you feel like I'm rambling on, I could potentially do that. I tend to do that when it's something that I like talking about, so please tell me to either slow down, ask a question, or chime in so it's more of a conversation and not just a one-sided thing. I'm originally from Massachusetts, so I should be used to the cold, but I'm not. Born and raised there. I went to school there, and I studied chemical engineering in college, so that was my study background. Got my master's in engineering and also got my master's in management studies and all that stuff, and data analytics. So one of my big things is I really like numbers and data, and I use that a lot when I coach athletes. So currently I work as a strength and conditioning coach over at the University of Arizona. I work with triathlon, swimming, diving, men's golf, and I help out with volleyball. And I also do a lot of sports science initiatives within the department. And once we go into sports science, that's looking at data to optimize performance for the athletes. And so I tend to bring a lot of those things that I like doing at work when I do online programming with my athletes. At the university, we have a ton of technology. So we have like force plates, which basically you just jump on these metal slabs. They're just these metal slabs, you just jump on them and it gives you a bunch of data regarding your asymmetry, your power output, all this stuff. It's like one of the best tools to see if an athlete is progressing without having them do a one rep max test or something like that. You could really get a lot of information. It's also
specifically for lifts?
So for example, just to give a little bit more background on force plates, you can use it for different things. So the measurement that I like doing is I have athletes stand on the force plates and I have them do a counter movement jump, and I have them do it 3 times. From those 3 jumps, I get a ton of metrics. I only look at 3 to 5, right? Because you could get super inundated with all that information. And the ones I look at is peak power relative to body weight, absolute peak power. I look at jump height, and I look at eccentric peak power. So all this information, and I also look at asymmetries. So from that information, I get to see what their peak power is, right? So for an athlete, really and when I mean athlete, I mean like a sport-specific athlete, not like a CrossFit athlete or anything like that. Their one rep max isn't as important. However, it is an indicator if they're getting stronger, which translates well to their sport, right? But it doesn't really matter what their one rep max back squat is. Some of the best athletes I see are the worst in the weight room, and some of the athletes that are best in the weight room are not the best in their sport.
Social good strategy.
They're still good strategies, yes. But so with the force plate, we get to see power output, which is essential for most sports, right? A volleyball player, you really want them to be powerful in their jumps. Same thing with a golf, you want them to be very powerful through their hips, all those things, even runners. So that information is super essential. So that's what force plate testing is, if I bring that up. The only issue with force plate testing with athletes outside of the collegiate realm or professional realm or anything like that is that it's not really that accessible. The force plate setup is itself like $50,000 or something like that. So it's really not, you don't see it in gyms or anything like that. You usually see it in performance centers is where you find it most. So that was a whole tangent. But what I like to do is I like to use data to help with preventing injury and getting athletes back into their sport, okay? And I do that with athletes of specific sports and CrossFit athletes as well. You can find a lot of things with data to kind of mitigate injury. And when I say injury prevention and mitigation, there's this whole debate online where people are like, oh, it's injury prevention is not injury mitigation, blah, blah, blah. And it's always like some PT or something like that who's arguing it. For me, it means the same thing. I'm not going to get into semantics of it. What we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure the athlete stays healthy. So injury prevention and injury mitigation, when I say that, don't take it too literal and too precise in that sense. So, agenda items. A lot of times we have a plan, whether it's something we write ourselves or a coach writes for us, and we find it perfect. We're like, it fits in my schedule, it's the correct progression, it's a smart progression, it's all this stuff, and bam, we get an injury or nagging pain that kind of messes up everything, right? And so what we're gonna look at is what are some potential causes of those pains and injuries, some objective and subjective data, injury mitigation, prevention, how can we avoid it, specifically using data, and how to manage injury in season and off season. So this is actually what I have for all my online athletes, all my ZOR athletes. I created a template for their whole periodization throughout a full year. So you'll see here lists the days of the week, here lists the months. So each week I have what the macro cycle, mesocycle looks like, okay? So here they're doing a lot of battery, gymnastics, density rate, strength. And below I write some specific notes for that athlete. Once we're done with these 8 weeks, you'll see they go into some prep transition for the open. So I have that written out for the full year. So as I'm writing out their plan, I'm following this here. And this is the perfect plan that we have set up in all ideal situations.
What are the numbers in the square with me?
Yeah, that's just a day of the month. So for example, this is December 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, right? So it's just a visual for me. It's a lot going on, but what I like to do is I like to write out the whole year in advance so that we can see things. We also have athletes who may be military or something like that. So I write in there like, oh, hey, they'll be gone this week. So this week we're gonna have to make adjustments to here. It gives me just a layout. Right? That's the perfect plan I have set up for each athlete. And I do the same thing for my sports at the U of A. So you'll see here, we do accumulation, we go into intensification phase, meaning strength building. Then we go into realization, that's where we go into more power building things, power development, explosive work, and then they have their competitions and all that. And I have it all laid out. With sports, especially something like CrossFit, you'll see that in this perfect world, you have this perfect plan, and then, on this day, they come with a low back injury, then it prevents them from doing all the movements and all this stuff, and they kind of have to navigate it. It kind of sucks. It usually happens during either competition phase or somewhere here, right? Usually accumulation phase, when you're looking here, that's usually where I put an accumulation phase. That's like more bodybuilding stuff, right? Just general strength, all that good stuff. Usually people are pretty healthy during that time. It's when you start preparing for things like the open and things start getting a little bit more intense and you're doing a lot of repetitive movements that you start getting those injuries. I'm sure you guys see it all the time, right? Like you're doing so much pressing, overhead pressing, then handstand push-ups, then handstand walk-ins, then ring muscle ups with the same thing. You're working the shoulders over and over again. You start getting these nagging pains, knees, shoulders, back, all that stuff. So you're developing a perfect training plan, you're being consistent, putting in good effort, and then you start feeling these pains. And like I said, the big ones, shoulder, knees, low back, the big ones there. And then that prevents you from getting to your competition and goals. And it sucks. I'm sure you guys know. You feel like you're progressing and then out of nowhere, something happens. It's like, oh, now I can't squat to full depth, all this stuff. And it's literally the worst thing ever. And if you try to push it, you make it worse. But if you don't find that right sweet spot, you can also regress. So you're trying to find what you can do to not lose it, but also to continue going down the path that you want. And there's reasons why that happens, right? Before I get there, when you develop the training plan, you have all these things. You should, with your coach, have talked about proper load progression. You should have done something like a gap analysis, like, hey, this is where I want to go, this is a goal, and this is where I want to go, this is where I'm at. How do we get from point A to point B, right? What's the gap between those two? You identified weaknesses and strengths. You built a microcycle and a mesocycle and a macrocycle, and that's all basically what your weekly training plan looks like, what your blocks look like, 4 to 6 weeks, 4 to 8 weeks, and what the year looks like. And then you use sound strength and conditioning principles. You're not doing sets of 35 expecting to build strength, right? If you're trying to build strength, you stay in a certain parameter. If you're trying to build muscle, you stay in a certain rep parameter, all that stuff. And then the injuries, there's many causes of it. And I'm sure you guys see it all through like Instagram, right? And like just being around this space a lot of stuff you already know. Poor recovery. You're not sleeping. You're not drinking a jug of water. You're not taking rest days.
Literally is the biggest thing. It's the biggest one of
Yeah, but there's a reason I haven't seen, like, ever heard of Stacy being injured, right? There's like, yeah, she's like, yeah, exactly. So we all know that, right? It's not like this is brand new news, right? You know you need to have recovery days, rest days. Not every day is a hard go-get-it day. Poor nutrition, like making sure you're getting enough calories, enough sufficient macro and micronutrients. Again, it's not news, but a lot of times they get lost over time. Like how many of you guys, like usually if you're really good with your nutrition and then something in life happens or whatever, and then out of nowhere you're like, oh man, I've been eating like shit for like 6 months. And you're like it just kind of like goes. No, for example, my defense, all right, so for example, I'm usually really good with like prepping all my meals, bringing food to work, all that stuff, and I'm really regimented, all that crap. And then I changed jobs, I moved to a different apartment, all these things, and then out of nowhere, like that routine gets lost. And then I realized like, oh, I'm constantly going to the food court to grab food. I'm constantly bringing a protein bar instead of a meal or whatever, and things like that. And then over time, I realized that develops. Not like McDonald's every day, you know. Another thing too, weaknesses or imbalances, a lot of times that can cause injury. If someone is weak, has a weak back or whatever, a lot of times that's where they develop those injuries. And that's why we have times during the year where we're focused on just like bodybuilding, general strength work, so we can build all that, so when it gets to the really intense part, which is usually in season and competition season, we're good to go. And like I mentioned with the force plates, that's why I do a lot of the force plate data. I could see the asymmetries between limbs and all that stuff. So like with my triathlon athletes, I have them do a single leg pogo hop on the force plate. And then it'll give me the asymmetry and their strength and reactive strength index and all these different metrics. And I get to see like, oh, that athlete's super imbalanced. Like puts a lot of low power output on this leg versus this leg, and we can now accommodate training to make sure we mitigate an injury. So before season starts, I have them doing a bunch of single leg work, trying to strengthen that right leg versus the left leg and all that stuff. So you're looking at that to build towards that. Another thing too is making sure that and we'll get into this later, but having the appropriate exercises to address those things. So knowing the athlete individually and knowing where they're weak and what they need to work on. And like we mentioned before, injuries can be caused by repetitive movement. So we all know that, especially in CrossFit. All those movements work in the same joints over and over. But you need to be ready for that too, because a lot of the workouts, and you'll see in competition, it'll be like working the same, like fatigue of the same musculature, right? So you're doing... Huh?
There was a lot of hinging in the open.
Yes, yeah. What was it, 20? Yeah, all of them were very, yeah. Right, so you gotta be ready for that. So like, during your training, you shouldn't be doing that much hinging normally, right? But you got to also build yourself up to be ready for that. Poor load management. So let's say you're on a plane that's really not meant for you, that you haven't progressed to it, or that, I hope this never happens, but it does because people are crazy, but they'll have bad coaches who will basically give them way too much right out the gate, or they're just unreasonable with the amount of work they do. And then I don't know if it's like ever happened to you, but like there's also a mental side of it too, yes. Right? Where it's like you feel like you always need to do this much and really you don't. Yeah. It's like you want to take the minimal effective dose to get to your goal. like you'll notice some metrics go up, like resting heart rate, and that's one that you don't want to go up, right? You want to bring that down. That happens usually with poor load management. But yeah, definitely. And we see it a lot too, like in the collegiate setting, these athletes, some athletes like get trained way too much, and they'll come into the weight room and they're like, oh, we just did this amount of work for like 4 hours. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm not gonna have you freaking lift or anything like that, so we'll do mobility today. You know, it's just like being able to also auto adjust too, but you'll see that a lot. And that's one that, you know, bugs me. Fatigue, you already know if you're tired and you're lifting super heavy, it's probably not gonna be a good day. And then accidental injuries, like when I fell off a box jump and tore my meniscus. Yeah. So with CrossFit and online coaching and all that stuff, obviously, like I mentioned, we don't have access to GPS or accelerometers. We don't have access to velocity-based training or power output from force plates. So I stick to the ones that we do have. We can estimate 1 rep maxes based on if you have like a strength session or something like that. I'll get into that. Your load and volume, your coach can definitely be able to calculate that. And then if you have a Whoop or any type of watch, you can get your HRV and resting heart rate. There's all these things where people are like, oh, it's not accurate, all this stuff. Maybe it's not, but it's pretty precise. So you could see trends. So maybe my resting heart rate based on my Whoop isn't accurate, but it is precise from day to day, so I can see if it's trending up or down for myself because it's already calibrated. So that's super helpful data. So those are the things I like to use.
I'll just add, Dave, that for people who have, if you track HRV, it's the same thing. You want to look at the relative scores, not the absolute scores. So right. Like, don't compare Stacy to Riley, for example, if they both had a Whoop, right? Like compare your scores on one day versus your scores on another day. That'd be my recommendation if you have that. Yeah,
so you'll see like one of the fittest people I know, her like HRV is super low. It's like 50 or something like that versus mine's usually in like the 140s. And I'm nowhere near as fit as her. And it's like, that's the one thing I could beat her on. Heart rate variability.
I have a question.
Yes.
Just to add on to this, like there's been a lot of talk in the fitness community and tracking stuff about like the VO2 max and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on that, and like what are the important like measurements to like you test that like before a conditioning phase, after a conditioning phase, and what are sort of the markers that we should look at for that? Yeah,
so VO2 max, I haven't really done it a lot with athletes just because I haven't figured out how it varies from different technologies, because I know like you can get it from your Apple Watch and other watches and all that stuff, and I haven't really played around with it as much, to be honest. What I would do is if someone is focused more on endurance work, that's where I would look at it, and that would be probably useful for someone who that is their weak point, kind of seeing where their VO2 max is throughout time, right? And kind of getting that threshold. So I haven't really messed around with it. I know a lot of the endurance sports at the U of A do that. I would have to dig into it a little bit more to kind of give you that answer. But it is a metric that I think would be useful for mostly endurance stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because tour athletes, they're more so going to do for like the strength side of the strength conditioning, because their sport is an endurance sport, which is the conditioning.
Right, so that's the crappy part about not the crappy part, but I work a lot with endurance athletes at the U of A, as you notice, besides like golf is really the only one that is not endurance, and dive. But, so I don't do any of their conditioning, like obviously that's their sport, like swim and triathlon, like they handle that. I would mess it up if I try to intervene and add anything extra. So it's very much strength stuff. And then all the conditioning stuff, it's really minimal with the other sports like we do in the weight room. It's very minimal. But I know like the other teams, the other coaches do a lot more, like with tennis and all that, the coaches do a lot more conditioning with them because they don't get that in their practice. All right, so here's some objective data that I get from Whoop from some of my athletes. So this is like a grid that I have for them. So each week they fill in their information and I'm looking at it and I'm looking at trends. So this is from Monday to Saturday, and you'll see they put their HRV and their resting heart rate, and then it calculates the average over time, over the week, and then how it looks like over the week. And then this is over weeks periods of time. So this is daily and this is weekly. And what I'm looking for is making sure that the HRV is staying within that same range or going up, because that's the trend we want, and resting heart rate is going down or staying the same. So this athlete here specifically has a pretty low resting heart rate, so he's pretty healthy. And he's really good at running and all that stuff. So.
What is it? I can't see from back here.
Oh, it's like in the 49s to 50s. Yeah, so when I notice every time and this is over time, I've realized this is, once we have a really hard workout or he's given like max effort, his resting heart rate shoots up pretty significantly. The next day he wakes up with like a 65 heart rate, resting heart rate, which is like, and his is usually so low, like it usually gets down to like 45. So when I see that huge spike, I'm like, okay, and I've noticed that trend. So when I program for him, I know to do, hey, high training load on this day, low day, moderate, back to high. Low, moderate, high. So I know how to program for him and what trends to do, like what intensities to do per day to make sure this isn't going wacky, you know. And then I get some 1 rep max estimates and session ratings. So this one's subjective, this one's objective. So if I have them do like an AMRAP set, or hey, build up to RPE, do a set of 5, RPE 8, build to a heavy set or whatever. And then I could get their estimated 1 rep max from that, using the rep max chart, doing all that magic. And then I see here if it's going up or down. If I notice it's consistently going down, I know fatigue is building up based on the intensity leading up to competition season, or if they're fatigued or anything like that. And that allows me to kind of see where they're at and if I need to bring down loads. And then here, just based on what they're saying, oh, hey, that was super hard, 2 days in a row, and all that stuff, and getting their subjective data. So that's also there too.
Do you focus more on the variability in resting heart rate, or can you do any interpretation from like max heart rates during workouts?
Yeah, so if you're looking at max heart rates during workouts, that's like usually for threshold training, which I like to do to kind of see like where we can get them at and how long it took them to get there. Okay. So if it took someone like, because ideally you want that threshold to go higher over time and how long it gets there. So I would do that with threshold training, but it's not something I would do frequently. So it's like, if I have like a 8-week plan with them, I do like initial, middle, end, but it wouldn't be a weekly thing. Yeah, and kind of see where that trend goes. The resting heart rate and HRV is where I look at like daily and weekly. So that gives me a little bit more.
So is there some kind of formula or hierarchy, however a coach, a physiologist might describe it, to place these different metrics in a way that comprise overall fitness or capacity, or fill in the blank, whatever word you might want to use? I mean, as a coach, is it important, especially for a high-level athlete, to be able to synthesize this data in order to see what your athlete is capable of? And does that translate, for instance, to CrossFit and say someone's Fran time, or at least expected or threshold for any given type of workout that is operative in your minds on an ongoing basis, or is it more diffuse than that?
Yeah, I'm sure I don't know if there's been any research. So like with sports science specifically, what sucks is that like CrossFit doesn't have a lot of research. And that's like the one thing, is because usually they'll go to money sports first, right? So like football has some, right? Soccer has a ton. So those, because there's more funding to go into those, because they want to
provide.
Like
practicality wise, though, they have like a force plate or an ergometer or a treadmill where they can hook you up to mass. So very rarely are they doing kettlebell swings and thrusters, because mass is
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right, so like that as well, and like obviously it's not like a professional sport yet or like a collegiate level sport, so like access to those technologies where you would find all that information is not like accessible. So that's like really hard, and then also it goes into like what I'm sure like you've heard discussions where it's like, what makes a really good CrossFit athlete? Is it like that they're really strong, or is it better to be conditioned and all that stuff? And it's like, well, it depends on the season, because like the open, you don't really have to be that strong, but you have to be pretty conditioned, and then it gets more into strength, and then blah, blah, blah. But the strongest athletes never win the CrossFit Games, and that's a whole other discussion. And so it's kind of like, what do you look for? And I think it depends on the time of season, the type of athlete, where you know where their strengths are and like what you can optimize with them. But looking at each a piece of information and bringing it all into one, I think would be important.
The unique aspect of it too is, Sam and I were talking about this, it's one of the few things where it's like, there's a huge variable component where you don't know what the test is going to be. It's pretty much one of the only sports I can think of where that's the case. Like, if you're a runner, you know your marathon distance is 26.2 miles. So it's very easy to, not easy, but
It's predictable.
you can drink.
Right.
You know exactly what the test is going to be.
Yeah.
You play a sport. Yeah, the variable is like your opponent and whatever, but like you know the rules of the game, you know the test, you know I need to be able to play this many minutes, whatever. In a sport like CrossFit, that variable component is pretty huge, and the fact, and especially when you get to those higher levels, a lot of it depends like on the tests.
Yeah.
In terms of, like somebody could be really good at something. Obviously, the people who are super well-rounded do the best because you can have no weaknesses. But I think we've seen examples like if you follow the sport of like depending on that year and what's tested, it can really swing who does well and whatever. But it's just an interesting thing about this sport is the variable component.
Yeah. I think that's like the most interesting thing. So like if I had all the technology for a CrossFit athlete, I would literally test them on everything I could and just kind of like see from there like what we can optimize and all that stuff, and like see if there's any glaring weaknesses. But it would be really hard to kind of just like, hey, pinpoint this. But if there was like, if I were to do a study with all the technology, and then I have like, I'm seeing like correlations, like, oh wow, they perform way better when their resting heart rate is low or when their HRV is at this point, then that's what I'll focus on because I know their performance is correlated to that.
That would be my answer to the question, is what she just said, would be like, different athletes is going to be different things, where it's like, okay, for this athlete I found that, okay, that if their HRV actually is very tied to how good they feel on a particular day, and they have the loops, so let's use that. Where somebody else, it might just be like, their strength numbers are down, so we're probably just doing a little bit too much volume than they can handle, so you just pull that back a little bit and wait for the fatigue to come back, and hopefully the strength numbers bounce back, and then it's like good. So like, it could just be something as simple as like, hey, like every other week, let's just like build a heavy power clean in like 10 minutes and just see where you're at. And if it's like way low, we probably just know that we've done a little bit too much. Something as simple as that. So it just depends on the athlete a little bit.
Right. It's just paying attention to like how much you're doing and how you're responding to it, what it usually boils down to. All right. And then basically we kind of touched on this through that discussion. It's like from the coach's perspective, you want to look at any trends of your athlete, right? You want to see what's happening. That's why you're their coach. You can't just assume like, oh, we're just going to keep going up every week. We'll take a deload and then go up again. Like, it's not how it works. Like, you have to pay attention to that individual person and all that stuff. And that's what makes individual coaching very, very different than following just like a template, like a 5-3-1 strength template or conjugate method template or anything like that, is that you have someone looking at all this stuff and making sure that you're good, and they're kind of analyzing like how you're performing and what things you have to tweak so that you don't have to worry about it and they just do that for you. And what adjustments you need to make. And yeah, these are basically all things. And one thing I'd mention is, especially with like injury, right? I'll look at all the data and I'm trying to prevent injury and all this stuff and increase performance. But at the end of the day, if someone gets a bad injury and they're looking at, and we've done everything we could and it's just getting worse, like, I'm not a physical therapist or an athletic trainer or anything like that. Like, I'm going to refer them to a professional because like that's their best way of getting better. And so like I could do as much as I can, but I know my lane as well. And I know that like a lot of times getting a physical therapist to look at things and making sure that they have a plan for them is the best way to go. And then time of season is also how I'll like make the changes that I need to make, right? So if it's off season, then it's like all right, you have more time, there's no competition in sight. Most of the stuff is pretty general strength anyways. So it's like, all right, we'll find ways to kind of work around it and get you stronger. So if you have knee pains and we find like the culprit of knee pain may be a mobility issue, then hey, we're gonna work on mobility because we have time to do that and you're not gonna lose strength and all that stuff. And we're gonna address that, and then if you need physical therapy, then you go to physical therapy. If it's in season, and this mostly goes for like professional or collegiate athletes where like there's more on the line, like their scholarships and stuff like that. So I'll be like, all right, we'll make modifications to movement. So if they're having knee pain, but I still need to get their strength up because there's a competition in 2 weeks, I'm not gonna push them to the point where they're gonna get injured, because that's bad. But I'll be like, all right, I'm not gonna risk anything, but what we'll do is we'll do like box squats or something like that to a level that won't bother your knee. That way we're still getting some strength work in, you're still good to go, and we're not making it worse. And then making sure the athletic trainer looks at them so that they're getting the work they need. But we look at other priorities as well that are doable. So if they have, let's say, a CrossFit athlete, knee hurts and all that stuff, well, it's like, okay, what other weaknesses can we tackle that'll help you in your competition? So right now we can't squat heavy, but I know that you need to really work on your handstand work. Well, guess what? That's gonna be what we're gonna focus on because your knees are not doing too hot. So we're gonna go for handstands. And everyone has multiple holes that they could work. It's not just one weakness, right? So just go to the next weakness and then do things that will help that knee pain. All right, so just kind of a summary. You have to monitor the data. That's what your coach should be doing. Monitor load on movement patterns. Make sure to strength train. So that's one thing you'll see a lot, especially on Instagram. And I don't know if it's like that. I'm sure it's like that in the CrossFit Instagram world. I feel like my Instagram world has shifted from like CrossFit to like French bulldogs and college strength coaching, and it's kind of like lost, the algorithm. It's kind of lost the CrossFit touch that I had to it, which makes me not so in touch with it. So I'm sure there's a lot of things of like, oh, knee pain, do this, and like all this stuff. And a lot of times people get so caught up in that they're like, oh, I'm not gonna squat, I'm gonna just do like leg extensions, like body weight leg extensions. Like, no, all that stuff, like shockwave, polar plunge, all those recovery tools. And it's like, usually strength training is the way to go, right? And then obviously, like if you're having that pain and all that stuff, go see your PT. But a lot of times people get these pains because they're not strength training properly, and they're not going heavy properly. They're not doing compound movements, and they're not being smart with it. And a lot of times they just move strength training out altogether. So that's why you'll see athletes, like if they're a runner or something like that, who don't do strength training, a lot of times they'll get injured. And then include those accessory movements, those bulletproofing movements as accessory. So do your strength training and then have some accessory work. All right, that's it. I rambled on. You guys got any questions?
I like the attention to detail.
Thanks.
Honestly, it's refreshing that there are people out there that are willing to look at the data in such a different way than other coaches that are like, you just have to do a bar muscle up.
Yeah.
You just have to do this, or you should be able to always do this weight and never struggle with it. And it's nice to see that you have such an attention to like specific details for like athletes, individuals.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, thank you.
you're welcome.
It's awesome.
It seems like you don't have access to the full suite of fine tuning that you might have for a collegiate athlete in a more of a money sport, but taking that mentality and doing what we can within the larger variables that comprise CrossFit, right? Everything from a 10K row to a 2-minute max power workout, right? So, or a max lift, right? There's a lot of different ways a lot of different levers to pull, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And even if you don't have all the data that you might want in order to maximize that or optimize that, there's still better versus worse by incorporating as much of that data and feedback from the athlete, I guess, that you can.
Right.
You can't sell it, but subjective stuff is still far and away usually better than
right.
Like, if somebody comes in, they look like crap, you ask them like crap, how they feel, and they say, I feel like crap. they usually perform like crap.
Yeah, right.
Like, it doesn't take a scientist to figure that out.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not $1 million business.
And so that's the crazy thing about it is like there's all these pieces of information and all that stuff and all this technology, which I love, I nerd out on, but at the end of the day, that's usually what it comes down to. And so like I'll create, like I have like a dashboard for all my athletes of every sport, and it kind of looks at their load over time and their force plate data and these cool graphs and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, they'll come in and they'll be like, my boyfriend broke up with me, like all this. And it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to have you do a 5-rep max. I'll just like chill with you and we'll kind of do something easy and going because I know that's not going to work out. Yeah. But if it's a guy and he's like, yeah, my girlfriend broke up with me, I was like, we're going for a 1-rep max today, bro. We're going to get after it. Yeah, so yeah, like it usually always goes down to.
But as a remote athlete, as a remote coach, certainly, you know, and it's a competitive landscape, right, for you guys compared to, you know, other coaching that's available off the shelf or even one-on-one. There's presumably the athlete has to be willing to provide this data and to be engaged, but if you do a better job with those inputs in order to help give them the outputs, then presumably it's good for business,
Yeah.
you know, hopefully as well.
Yeah, for sure.
And to be honest, that's where I think the people who do it right just have more dialogue and communication with their athletes versus more toys.
Yeah.
Like, if you talk to people more and have good systems for feedback and you actually just take the time to do it because it takes time, you're for it better.
Yeah.
Most people are just too busy or they don't. I mean, the people who are like super successful, you see them, they only have a few athletes because that's what it takes. It's a lot of time.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely takes a lot of time if you're looking at all those things and all that.
What's a position you take as a coach or practice you take as a coach that you feel like is most contrary to other coaches?
That's a good question. Yeah.
I feel like I hear a lot of like sports coaches, particularly in season, are very hesitant about like weight training. They don't want to get their athletes like during the season.
Right.
They don't want them lifting weights. But you know, listening to people like yourself and other people who are very in tune with modern science, that you actually should be. Again, you're not hitting 1-rep maxes like during your season. Like,
Yeah.
But you should still be like strength training, at least like maintain strength.
Yeah.
Positions and stuff like that.
For sure, and that's like something, I'll get back to your question when I think of an answer. But that's like one thing with like all my athletes in season and all that, it's like, okay, obviously now they're super tired from their sport practice, and I'm like, okay, so they're gonna come in super tired, but we still need to strength train and they still need to maintain that strength because they'll have 2 weeks competition, then 2 weeks, and then a competition, then 1 week competition. And then like, if I'm not strength training at all, that's 6 weeks of not strength training. That's over a month. They're gonna lose the physiological effects of strength training and their strength is gonna decline. So I have to look at that timeline as well. So I'm like, okay, we've been bench pressing, so guess what? That's very high neurological demand. So we'll do pin presses. So it's only the concentric versus the eccentric phase. That'll minimize soreness. We'll start getting good power outputs, still good strength gains. Oh, we've been doing snatches from the floor. We'll do snatches hang, less neurological demand. You could go heavier and all this stuff. So you're still doing all those things, but you're just kind of modifying what you can, or modifying variables like intensity, load, rep range, and all that stuff. So instead of doing 4 sets of 8, we'll do 2 of 8 or something like that.
Yeah, my son ran track for Point Park University, high jump too, and it was like as soon as the season started, they didn't lift weights.
Yeah.
I'm like
that was wrestling.
Yeah. You'll see that in like different, it depends who the strength coach is in different places, but I know like most of the coaches I work with, I would say all of them, like we do what we can to keep the athletes in the weight room and making sure that we're adjusting what we can for them so that we're not digging them into the ground, but also making sure that they're maintaining what they can. Because during in season, it's usually a maintenance phase. It's like, hold on to what you can. Yeah.
Quick question on HRV.
Yeah.
So when you're measuring that HRV, is it, well, number one, what's the highest you've ever seen? And number 2, is there like a dangerous or unhealthy number for that to get to?
Yeah. The highest I've ever seen was actually mine, which was like was like 140 or something like that.
Because hers is like 160, 170.
No way. Oh no, really? I've never seen it that high.
Resting heart rate says it's 40.
I've seen like to like 190.
Really?
I'm 190 pretty consistent.
So,
So
like,
one is like, I was like, am I getting
Can
back?
Can that get to an unhealthy number?
Yeah, that's a good question. To be honest, I don't know, and now I'm gonna do some research what I can on that because I don't know.
Recovery is in the red. If I hit like 170, I'm in the red on my boots.
Oh really?
Oh, wow.
So and then, but if you're in the 190s, that's where you're green.
I'm like 98% recovered today because I was 2 of 1 last night.
Okay. So yeah, this is what I would assume, but I'm not too sure. I would assume that because most of it's usually relative, as long as you're in that range of relativity, and like you're not going from like 101 to 201, right? That's kind of sketch. But if that's where you're usually at, then that's probably like okay, right? And then same thing with resting heart rate. There is a value that's too low, but if you're usually like 40 to 50, that's like you're golden. You have good condition. Yeah.
I'm sure there's like a medical value.
Yeah.
Oh, this is too high
Right.
variability because your heart's not like contracting properly. But like,
Yeah.
outside of like a medical anomaly, it's probably like generally higher is better, sort of like resting heart rate.
Yeah.
Generally lower is better, provided you're not like experiencing something really weird where like you're not actually getting low flow.
Well, my other question then too, like not that it's related to like CrossFit or working out, but you said your athletes have them. Is that like a university provided thing, or is it just like whichever athlete kind of has it?
Yeah. So my online, like my online coaching athletes, they all just happen to have the Whoop, and then at the university, it is provided for depending on who your sport coach is and what, because they'll have like a budget, right? And they'll be like, I want my athletes to have this. So like my triathletes all have Whoop data.
I have another question too, again, like unrelated. But you said that you had gotten a degree in chemical engineering, and then you said like business administration or something. But how did you end up
in strength and conditioning?
In your position.
Yeah. So I was chemical engineering major. Junior year, I was like, damn, I don't want to do this, but I'm too deep in. Like, I'm too deep in now. Like, I'm going to go get this degree and whatever. I went into the military after college, so I did ROTC in college. So I went into the Air Force once I graduated college, and that's how I got to Arizona. But during my time in college, I did shadow like a few coaches at local colleges around to see what their strength and conditioning was like. My school didn't really have a good strength and conditioning program. It was D3. No, but WPI was like 5 minutes away from my house. But it was, so I went to MIT, which is like not known for sports, right? So,
It is.
So yeah, like they're not known as a sports school, so it's like, all right, I can't really learn much here about that. So, so then that happened, and then once I graduated, I started doing like coaching on the side, like part-time as I was in the military. Yeah, and then eventually I left the military and then went full-time into it, so.
Before you did, just answer question.
Yeah. What?
Yeah, you like CrossFit.
Oh yeah. Yes.
In the strength and conditioning world.
Right. So in the strength and conditioning world, I think CrossFit, like liking CrossFit, doing CrossFit, working with athletes in CrossFit, like has helped me a ton. Because there's just some things that like, because CrossFit touches like upon so many things, and you'll see a lot of coaches in like college, like they'll focus on, they're really good at like certain things. Right? Like they're very good at the strength side or conditioning side or speed and agility or blah, 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 Olympic lifting, all that stuff. And it's like, those are all things we do in CrossFit. So like, I'm usually really good at one point. Like I also have a strong point just like every other coach, but I also like have touched a ton like throughout a lot of areas because of CrossFit. And I think that helps a ton.
Is your personal like focus CrossFit?
Yeah. Stay tuned. So I've taken a break just for a little bit just because like I don't have access to a good CrossFit gym because the college strength room is just like squat racks and machines. So I'm like, I've been stressing every day trying to like get ring muscle ups in and this and that. And it's like, I'm like, I'll just take a break now until I could figure that out. So now I'm.
One sports to low cost of living.
Huh?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, we have 2 Aldi.
We also have a Target. And Wegmans. while you're here, you can go to Wegmans.
Wow, this is sounding like a really great place to live.
Thank you guys.
Thanks for listening today. If you're someone who just started listening to the show, I would encourage you to subscribe so you can stay up to date. If you're someone who's been listening for a while, I would encourage you to rate and review the show. And lastly, the best thing that you can do to support our work is also the best thing that you can do for your performance. And that is by hiring one of our coaches. Until next time, stay the course.